And now, classic romance stories narrated by Karen Teeters. Enjoy these vintage Pulp Fiction magazine love stories from over a half-century ago. Brought to you by our sponsors, ClassicRomanceStories.com and Classic Romance Stories, the YouTube channel. Now, here's Karen Teeters.
Hello and welcome. This is Karen Teeters, narrator of Classic Romance Stories. I read loud, short romance stories from the actual Pulp Fiction magazine titles of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. This edition, I share a story written by Myra Gay, which appeared on page 5 of the March 10th, 1934 Love Story magazine. Also, please enjoy the line drawings that originally accompanied the story. Here's a precursor to our story. You never set the day for our wedding. All the crowd we go with know that we're engaged, so I'm poison to men. Our story, Extra Sheer by Myra Gay. Fran dusted all the wax figures twice. Still, Bill didn't come. The waiting began to get on her nerves. This was the 4th time she had had to wait for him this week. She bit her lip angrily. The bell tinkled as the door opened. Fran whirled about. Then, "Oh, Mr. Van Erp," she said. Derek Van Erp looked at her. His blue eyes were very intent. She always had the feeling that he could read exactly what she was thinking. "You were expecting someone else, weren't you?" "Sorry I'm not the person, but won't I do?" Fran adored the fit of his suit, and his spats, and his cane, and the gray gloves he held so nonchalantly in his left hand. If Bill would only dress like that. But Bill was the sort of fellow who thought putting on a clean collar more than once a week was effeminate. "It's really after hours, Mr. Van Erp," Fran said primly. "But since I'm here, is there anything I can get for you?" He smiled. "You could get me $1 million, perhaps, or happiness, or love." He said the last word very slow. Fran's cheeks went pink. She almost forgot she was in love with Bill whenever Mr. Van Erp came into the store. Mr. Van Erp made her feel queer and breathless, as though she had been running a long race and was just in sight of the goal. Impulsively she spoke. "Why, you don't have to wish for things. You have everything. Money, position." Her voice trailed away. The smile died out of Mr. Van Erp's eyes. "I have nothing," he exclaimed bitterly. "My wealth consists of $40 in cash. I got that by selling my entire wardrobe. The clothes I have on are all I have left. Material possessions, that is. Of course I possess a broken heart, if that could be classed as an asset. And I mustn't forget cranky old Uncle Lawrence. He's despised me all my life. If he knew I was going in for carnival life, what a laugh he'd get." Fran gripped the edge of the counter. "You mean you're broke, Mr. Van Erp? Really broke, a rich, important man like you?" Derek looked ill at ease. "Sorry," I flared out. I didn't mean to, but I've been pretending so long that it was a relief to tell the truth for a change." Fran felt a queer, constricted sensation around her heart. "The waxwork figures you've been buying. You don't mean—" "Oh, Mr. Van Erp, I thought of course you were joking. You couldn't intend to have a waxwork show at Coney. A social register fellow like you?" Her eyes were swimming with tears. Derek didn't notice. He was touching the tip of his well-polished shoe with the ferrule of his cane. "I could cage from my friends, I suppose, or depend on invitations at house parties to see me through, or go down on my knees to Uncle Lawrence, but that sort of thing never appealed somehow. No, this is better. The Van Erps bequeath me just one legacy, a waxwork show. Those dusty, broken figures have been stacked for years in the Van Earp attic. Now I'm going to make them support me. I never would have fixed those figures if I thought you were in earnest, cried Fran. I imagined, of course, that you were going to have some sort of party using the wax figures. Derek looked straight into her eyes. Nice of you to be so worried about me, little golden-haired girl. I love it. I eat it up. Especially since another blonde sent me back my ring the minute she knew the market had wiped me out. Now, I want to ask a favor of you. I've just two things left in this world, the waxworks and my pride. Tonight I'm dropping out of my old world, disappearing. None of my friends are ever going to know that Derek Van Earp is a waxworks proprietor. Silly of me, of course, but I'd go to any lengths to keep anybody from knowing, so you will keep my secret for me, golden girl. Confusedly, Fran murmured, Of course, I'll never tell Mr. Van Earp. Cross my heart, but you don't know anything about Coney Island. Why, I'll bet you've never even been out there. Don't bet, or you'll lose. I've haunted the place for weeks. 3 days ago, I bought my location and moved the figures out. Last night, I opened. He frowned. Not much business yet. Fran thought back. You bought an Abraham Lincoln and a Napoleon, didn't you? From us, I mean. He nodded. And you fixed Marie Antoinette's face and McKinley's leg and Julius Caesar's neck. They look as good as new. Fran looked away. Mr. Krause charged you top price because he thought you were rich. I'm so sorry. If we'd known. Mr. Van Earp seemed to grow taller. I'm not yet accepting charity, he said stiffly. What I buy, I pay for. Hastily, Fran asked, What is it you want today, Mr. Van Earp? He drew a small package out of his coat pocket. I came for advice. I didn't like the cotton stockings Marie Antoinette was wearing, so I got these. But I wasn't at all sure of the size, and the clerk said they couldn't be returned if they were tried on, even by a wax figure. So will you see if they're correct? Fran took out a pair of extra sheer pearl gray stockings. She caught her breath. They're lovely, she cried. Unconsciously, her tone was wistful. And I'm sure they'll fit. She caressed the stockings gently with the tips of her fingers. Fran wore service hose. They lasted longer. Suddenly she looked at Derek. Mr. Krause said that if you came into the store, you were to have a Chinese mandarin we have in the basement, she said recklessly, making up the story as she went along. We give a sort of bonus to our best patrons. It's on the house. Oh, Derek exclaimed. That's rather liberal, isn't it? The Chinese mandarin had been in the basement for 2 years. Mr. Krause had taken it on consignment, and the owner had never returned for the figure. Mr. Krause had forgotten it was even there. The gift of the figure might make up in some measure for the overcharging Mr. Krause had done, Fran thought. The figure is in the storeroom. I'll get it, Fran added. Derek insisted on following her down into the cluttered, dusty storage basement. The one dust-covered light in the place went out just as they reached the bottom step. Fran gave a little startled scream. Instantly, Derek's hand was on her wrist, steadying her. I've a flash in my pocket. Just a moment. He was fumbling for the flashlight with his other hand. Fran stood quite still. His touch was like fire on her wrist, fire that went straight to her heart and made it thud wildly. Unconsciously, she swayed toward Derek. The top of her head brushed his chin. Soft strands of hair caressed his cheek. She heard the swift intake of his breath. Then he caught her close in his arms. He held her for a pulsating, palpitating second. Fran grasped. Like a child, she lifted her lips to his. Derek's mouth closed down swiftly. His kiss was like a brand, binding her to him forever. Fran hadn't known a kiss could be like that. Bill's kisses stirred her, but never like this. Her lips grew warm, her breath caught in her throat with a little sobbing sound. Instantly Derek released her. "I had no right to do that," he said slowly. She stood motionless while her lips kept on thrilling to the magic of a kiss such as she had never known before. Derek found his flashlight. The round glow showed a jumble of waxen arms and legs and old costumes. Mr. Krause wasn't noted for his neatness. In the center of the melee was the Mandarin. He stood with his arms proudly folded. He was encrusted with dust and cobwebs formed a gray veil over his face. But he was an imposing figure, nonetheless. "There," said Fran huskily, "that's the Mandarin." The Mandarin wasn't very big. He reached only to Derek's shoulder, but it was rather difficult to get the figure up the narrow, steep stairs. Derek backed up the stairs, carrying the figure, while Fran held the flashlight. Fran wasn't paying any attention to where she was going, and the first thing she knew, there was a disheartening sound of a rip, and she knew her right stocking had caught on a projecting nail. With difficulty, she bit back the angry ejaculation which welled to her lips. Once upstairs in the store again, they cleaned off the Mandarin and found that the figure was in perfect condition. Derek's delight was boundless. 13 is my lucky number, he exulted, and this makes the 13th figure for my collection. I can't help but succeed with this. He had evidently forgotten all about the kiss, but Fran hadn't. Her lips kept tingling treacherously. "You'd better go wash your hands in the back of the shop," Fran said in a matter-of-fact tone. It was when Derek came back, debonair as ever, that he saw the rip in Fran's stocking. Fran assured him that it didn't matter at all, but Derek was abject. "If you hadn't gone down to get the Mandarin for me, this never would have happened. I've got to make it up to you somehow." His eyes stared at the cobweb sheer stockings destined for Marie Antoinette. "The very thing!" he cried. "Marie can get along with her cotton hose. Who cares? But these were intended for you." He crammed the stockings into Fran's protesting hands. Bill came into the store just then. Fran took one look at his gloomy face, and her cheeks flamed red. She put the stockings behind her with a betraying gesture. Bill went on glaring. Fran explained that Derek was a customer. She explained, too, vehemently in her agitation. Bill's mouth dragged down farther at the corners, the way it always did when Bill got jealous. Fran looked appealingly at Derek Van Erp. Derek drew on his gloves. He went to the door and hailed a taxi, motioning for the fellow to come in. "Thank you more than I can say for the Mandarin, Miss Fran," he said gently. Then, with his cane, he gestured toward the small, belligerent figure of the Chinese. "Put that in the cab, if you please." "Gee," muttered the taxi-man, but he gingerly approached the Mandarin just the same. "I shall let you know if the Mandarin brings me luck," said Derek, going out the door. "I shall give myself the pleasure of giving you a punch in the nose," growled Bill, when he was quite sure the taxi was gone. Then he jerked Fran's hands forward and looked at the stockings. Before Fran guessed what he was about, he struck her across the face with the flat of his hand. "That'll teach you not to be a little flirt and take presents from men like him." Fran put her hand to her face. She stared at Bill, who had suddenly become a stranger, a terrifying stranger. You didn't wait for me to explain, did you?" she said very slowly. "What explanation is there when a fellow like him gives stockings to a girl like you? There's just one answer." Fran's eyes were misted with angry tears. "And just what kind of a girl am I, Bill?" she demanded. Bill didn't look so angry now. He had the grace to seem ashamed. "I'm sorry, Fran, but you know what a temper I've got. I can't help flaring out sometimes." Was there a smug hint of satisfaction that his temper was so bad? Fran, listening with ears that criticized, thought there was. Bill took Fran into his arms. "A girl as pretty as you has to be careful what kind of presents she takes from men," he mumbled. Then his lips closed down over hers. Always before, Fran had liked Bill's kisses. She had been afraid when he kissed her, but still, she liked being kissed. Now something had made a difference. Impatiently, she drew away. "Oh, don't be like that, Fran. I'm sorry. I've begged your pardon, and you'll admit I had plenty of provocation. Come on, give us a kiss. Then we'll go out and eat. I found a swell place where they only charge 40 cents for a whole dinner." Fran shut her eyes and let him kiss her. "That's more like my girl," said Bill when he let her go. "Come on, let's go. I'm starved." Fran exhibited the tear in her stocking. "I can't go like this. I got this rip in my stocking, going downstairs for that figure for Mr. Van Erp. That's why he gave me this pair. Go out and get me some stockings, Bill, so I can change." Bill looked uncomfortable. "Oh, come along. Nobody'll notice if you've got to run. We're not going anywhere except to eat anyway." Stubbornly, Fran shook her head. "I won't go out in the street looking like this. Either you get me a new pair of stockings or else." "Oh, put those on if you're going to be so fussy," Bill exclaimed testily. "But for the love of Pete, let's get going." So after all, Fran wore Marie Antoinette's stockings. When she came out of the little back room where she had donned the stockings, her cheeks were flying danger signals of red. But Bill didn't notice. "The restaurant's just around the next corner," he said. "Funny we never noticed it before." "I don't think it's queer," Fran retorted when they got there. "I won't go in. I hate stuffy, smoky, dirty places like that, and you know it." "All right, buy your own dinner then, if you're too ritzy to come in here with me." Deliberately he went into the restaurant, leaving Fran on the pavement outside. Fran bit her lip. Tears stung her eyes. Bill and she were always having quarrels like this. Sordid affairs that made her feel cheap and ashamed. Slowly she walked along the street. There was a tea shop at the corner, a quiet place with black painted tables and orange candles that gave a romantic atmosphere. Fran went in and sat at a table near the door. She stared at the menu with eyes that did not see. The waitress did not come for some time. While Fran waited, the door opened noisily. Bill came in. He slammed the door behind him and stamped over to Fran's table. He sat down opposite her. "You're a nice one, walking out on me, like this," he growled. Fran drew a deep breath. "Bill, I can't stand this sort of thing any longer," she gasped. "We've been engaged for 6 months, and we fight all the time. There isn't a day that we don't quarrel about something. Bill, it's cheap and common to fight the way we do. What's the matter with us?" Bill said, "Honey, I love you so." Usually when he said that, Fran thrilled way down to her toes. This time she shook her head. "You've shut me up often enough saying things like that. This time love-making won't do. We've got to talk matters over." Just then the waitress came. Without consulting Fran, Bill gave the order. That was his usual custom. Fran paid no heed. "You never set the day for our wedding," she persisted. "I'm engaged to you. All the crowd we go with know that. So I'm poison to all the men. You've put your brand on me, Bill, yet you never talk about getting married." His eyes smoldered. "Well, I'd call that pretty low, if you ask me." Fran shook her head. "You don't understand, Bill. If you and I got along all right, I'd stay engaged to you forever and not even want to look at another man. But we fight, and—" she hesitated, summoning her courage. "I'm not sure, but I don't think I love you anymore, Bill. Maybe I did love you once, but now—" Her voice died away before the fury in his face. "So that's it, is it? Giving me the runaround because a swell pays you a little attention. Don't you know that his sort considers you on a par with a doormat? Something to wipe his feet on." "That isn't so," Fran said in a choked voice. "Oh, then you do like him. So that is it. All right, take him then. I'm through." The food came, and they ate. At least Fran supposed she ate. There was a big lump in her throat, and her heart felt frozen. "Sorry I can't give you back your engagement ring," she jerked out. "But since you never gave me one, I can't very well." "How could I give you a ring? I'm not a millionaire like your precious Van Earp." "He's no millionaire either. He's broke, poorer than you or me, but he's not whining, not much. He's going to run a sideshow at Coney Island. That's the kind of fellow he is." The minute Fran had spoken, she would have given anything to call back the sentences, but it was too late. Bill's eyes looked intent, interested. "So he's going to run a sideshow, is he? A waxworks, I suppose, or he wouldn't have been hanging around the store." "I don't know what sort of show," lied Fran, but it was too late. "I wonder what Sam Krause would say if he knew you were getting so thick with this Van Earp and turning down his own nephew. Or maybe you've forgotten that it was Sam Krause that introduced you and me. My Uncle Sam Krause." He looked at her intently. Fran had a scared feeling that seemed to be all over her body. "I suppose you mean my job?" she whispered slowly. "Just that." Bill leaned across the table. "Don't be a little fool, Fran." Fran laid down her fork. "Funny," she laughed jerkily. "It's taken a lot for me to see what you really are, Bill Krause. An awful lot. All week I've known that you were meeting Sadie Small on the quiet while I waited for you. But I wouldn't let myself know that because I didn't want to. I thought I loved you, see? Tonight, for the first time in my life, I see you as you really are. Common, jealous, cheap, two-timing, stingy, low. So we're through, Bill. Through for good. And if you want to take my job away, go ahead. I'll get another." Blindly, Fran went to the door and tugged it open. Blindly, she hurried along the street. She walked until she was weary. Then she saw a subway kiosk. She dived down the stairs and fumbled in her purse for a nickel. Once inside the turnstile, she took the train bound for Coney Island. All the long, jolting way out there, she thought about Bill. A curtain of tears was on her lashes. She was weeping for the love that had never really existed. It took quite a while to find the tiny place labeled "The Waxworks of History." A man was feebly spieling outside in a lackadaisical manner. No one was near. Fran tendered her dime to him and went inside. Derek Van Earp was sitting on a box, his face buried in his hands. At her step he jumped up. "Oh," he said, "you." His face was alight with pleasure. Shyly Fran said, "I thought I'd come out and see how the Mandarin stood the trip." Derek smiled. "He's the best exhibit I have, Miss Fran. I'm beginning to think that a man has to be born to this sideshow business. I don't seem to have quite the hang of it yet. You see, not a soul has come in since we opened." "I came in," said Fran. There was a queer little electric silence. Yes, you came, repeated Derek. That's the very nicest thing that's happened to me since everything went to smash. Do you really feel like that? Asked Fran. She was gripping one hand with the other tightly. I'm glad, because I've come out to take a job with you. A job? Gasped Derek. But I haven't any money. I can't pay you enough. I have some money saved up, said Fran stoutly. She looked around. The long, narrow room was partitioned off into 12 compartments. In the 12 spaces were set wax figures faintly reminiscent of a fancy dress ball. Caesar wearing a toga, Morgan in a pirate's doublet and hose, Cleopatra reclining on a divan, Daniel in the lion's den, George Washington about to chop down a cherry tree, William Tell with an apple in his hand, Florence Nightingale in a nurse's garb, Marie Antoinette coquettishly displaying her cotton stockings, Abraham Lincoln, Pocahontas, King George, President McKinley, and the Mandarin. They look quite all right, don't they? Derek asked, following the line of her gaze. His tone was anxious. They're hopeless, Fran exclaimed. Absolutely hopeless. Of course, no one would come in here. Not a chance. People only come to a waxworks to get the blue jimmies. Blue jimmies? Yes, nightmares, horrors. They want to see blood all over everything. Famous characters who have murdered folks with axes and things. Fran was almost tearful. George Washington murdered a cherry tree with a hatchet? Derek's smile was wry. Wouldn't that do? Fran struck her hands together lightly. I've an idea, Derek. We're going to make a success of this thing. She was so excited she didn't notice she had called him by his first name. We'll call this place the Chamber of Horrors. And when people get inside, they'll shudder with terror. Go out and rustle up a couple of cans of good bright red paint. After that, get me a needle and thread and a pair of scissors, and tell that half-dead individual out there to stop barking. He's through for the night. Then, as Derek blinked in surprise, Hurry, we have so little time. Fran awoke the next morning. She lay in bed, too lazily content to move. Presently, the unfamiliarity of her surroundings shocked her into complete wakefulness. She was in a tiny room, Spartan-like in its severity. She lay on a hard cot, scrupulously clean. Near her was a kitchen chair. A mirror was tacked to the wall. Beneath was a shelf with a basin containing water. Fran sat up with a jerk, clasping her knees with her interlaced fingers. What under heaven had happened to her own room? Someone knocked at the door. A masculine voice called, Fran, do hurry and dress. I'm afraid to stay alone any longer with these horrors. They make my blood run cold. Then Fran remembered. She laughed aloud. Coming, she cried. It had been a task transforming Derek's stiff galaxy of figures into a chamber of horrors. She and Derek had worked till 3 o'clock in the morning. Time raced by. Fran hurried into her clothes, washing in the small tin basin, combing the tangles out of her hair with her pocket comb. Derek had wanted to taxi her home at 3 in the morning. She wouldn't hear of that, and Derek wouldn't let her go home alone. There was a deadlock. Finally, Derek suggested diffidently that she could stay in the back room of the museum while he bunked with the living skeleton in the freak museum next door. Gladly Fran consented. So weary was she that she fairly fell into bed. But she couldn't sleep for a while. She kept thinking about 2 men, Bill and Derek, Derek and Bill. When she finally slept, she dreamed of the 2. Good morning, she said shyly, coming into the museum. Somehow she hadn't remembered how tall and good-looking Derek was. He bent and took both her hands in his. "I never can thank you enough for taking my dead waxworks and turning the place into a shambles." His mouth laughed, but his eyes were very earnest. Fran blushed. "But of course I can't let you quit your job and come out to work for me. That would be an imposition on my part. Besides, there's that boyfriend of yours." Fran said quickly, "Things do look grand, don't they?" She walked around examining the different exhibits. President McKinley was now a bartender in a saloon scene. They had put an apron around his middle, clad him in a working man's shirt, and smudged his face with charcoal. Caesar, dressed in modern attire, was a gunman with a revolver in his hand, menacing Florence Nightingale, now an entertainer in the place. Next to this was a Chinese scene. The Mandarin pointed a long fingernail at an unfortunate collie whose head was on the block. Over him bent a bloodthirsty figure with a hatchet in his upraised hand. They had turned the executioner's face away, lest his resemblance to one George Washington be too marked. In Derek's room lay the powdered wig and the blue satin suit previously worn by the figure. Marie Antoinette was walking through streets running with blood. Daniel was having a gory time in the lion's den. That was as far as Fran got in her examination of the museum. Derek stepped in front of her. He tilted her chin with his forefinger and looked deep into her eyes. "I want to tell you something," he said. "You're the grandest girl I've ever known, and the most beautiful." They stood quite still, gazing at each other. Fran felt a tingling of her spine. She trembled. Suddenly, the moment was gone. "Come on, let's eat," said Derek briskly. Over their bacon and eggs, Derek said something else that Fran was to remember always. "Funny how some people are friends the minute you first meet them. It was like that with me when I first saw you." Fran tried to reply, but the words stuck in her throat. She just sat looking at him. "Pretty swell, I must say." Fran's head went up with a jerk. "Bill!" she gasped. Bill Krause was standing next to the little white-topped table. So engrossed were they that neither she nor Derek had noticed Bill as he came into the restaurant. Bill's face was horrible. He looked as if he hadn't slept. His eyes glowered hatefully, and his mouth was a thin white line. "So, you spent the night with a sideshow punk, did you? After all your touch-me-not ways with me?" He hurled the words at Fran like so many handfuls of mud. "Bill!" gasped Fran. She felt faint and sick. Derek's eyes narrowed. He got up leisurely. "One more word and I'll knock you down," he said slowly. Bill took a step backward. "You can't shut me up. I followed Fran out here last night. I watched outside the place. Neither of you came out, and here you are, having breakfast together. What more proof do you want?" Derek moved so swiftly that afterward Fran couldn't believe that she had seen right. Bill sprawled on the floor with a surprised expression on his good-looking, sulky face. Derek looked at the knuckles of his right hand. "You'd better apologize to Miss Fran for this brawl," he said quietly. Fran's eyes were glazed with tears. "Please, go, Derek." She touched his sleeve with her finger. "Let me talk to him alone." "But," began Derek, gazing down at Bill. "Please," she repeated tremulously. "I'll be right outside," said Derek grimly. "Call if you want me." He paid the check for the breakfast and stalked out. He walked up and down like a sentry outside the window. Fran noticed that Bill took plenty of time about getting to his feet. Derek was outside by the time Bill faced her. Bill laughed hysterically. "So, you're the girl I thought was straight." Fran sighed wearily. "Bill, are you crazy? I stayed all night in the back room at the museum. Derek bunked with the living skeleton next door." Bill glazed at her from bloodshot eyes. "That's a new one. The living skeleton. What do you take me for, anyhow? Haven't I been through enough? I tramped back and forth in front of that cursed sideshow all night long. I'm about crazy." His voice broke. Fran looked at the man polishing glasses in the back of the restaurant. No one else was around. "Bill, you've got this all wrong." Bill came close. "I should kill you. You deserve it, but I love you, so I'm going to keep you straight for the rest of your life. If I have to keep you shut up in one room, we're getting married, you and me, right now." "So, at last you've said what I've been waiting to hear. For 6 months I've waited. Now when you do speak, it's too late." Fran's face was very grave. "Bill, I meant what I told you last night. You and I are through." "Will he marry you?" Bill's eyes glared into hers. "It isn't a question of marrying. I thought so. Well, you'd better do some talking. You're out of a job. My uncle won't let you come back. No recommendation either." Bill's tone gloated. "So you'd better take me up on my offer pretty darned quick." "Go away," said Fran slowly, "before I begin to loathe you." Bill's breath came whistling through set teeth. He caught her wrists and twisted them. His hands hurt. Derek came dashing into the lunchroom. His face was furious. Bill let go of Fran and dodged out of Derek's way. "Better be sensible," he advised Fran over his shoulder as he fled down the street. Derek came over to Fran. "If that beast hurt you—" His voice wasn't very steady. Fran gasped, "I don't believe I thanked you for the nice breakfast." Derek's face cleared. He smiled down into her eyes. "Did I ever happen to mention that you're the grandest girl in the world?" he asked softly. At 2:00, people began crowding around the Chamber of Horrors, attracted by the crimson skull and the crossbones Fran had painted. "Here," said Fran, taking the roll of tickets from Derek. "I'll sell these while you tell people about things inside the museum." "Oh, I couldn't let you do that, Fran. You've done so much already. Here's my dime, and I'd like to go into this here place. If you two could decide which one of you is going to sell tickets," broke in a woman's harsh voice. Fran pulled a ticket from the roll and pocketed the dime. She smiled at Derek. "Go along," she whispered. He patted her sleeve. "I'll get even later," he promised. Then he disappeared into the museum. All afternoon, people straggled into the Chamber of Horrors, but they didn't seem to be much impressed. When they came out, they announced loudly that the show was no good. Fran's heart contracted with fear. What if the museum failed after all? What would Derek do then? Her hands went clammy cold. About 4:00, business picked up. Crowds flocked in. They came out chattering interestedly. Fran strained her ears to listen. "Do you think King Louis is real?" "I don't. He's just another wax figure. But if you ask me, I'd say he's cleverly made." King Louis? But they had no figure of King Louis. There was no time to think about the matter. People were arriving too fast. Fran made change with flying fingers. By 5:30, the cash box was full. "This is the 0 hour, miss," said Pete. He was the new man they hired to ballyhoo. Might as well shut up shop for an hour. Fran nodded. Wearily she slipped down from the high booth. "Where's the boss?" went on Pete. "He hasn't as much as stuck his nose outside the pitch all afternoon." "I don't know," said Fran. She was suddenly worried. Hastily she went into the museum. At her entrance, a weary figure in a blue satin suit and wearing a white periwig got hastily in position on his knees in front of Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette was coquettishly lifting one corner of her skirt to display her shapely ankle, just as Fran had arranged. But Fran hadn't painted the sign which hung above her. "Is King Louis real? $5 to anyone who can make any of our wax figures smile." "Derek!" gasped Fran. King Louis scrambled to his feet, flexing his weary arms and legs as he did so. "I should have taken an easier position. Tonight I think I'll just try standing in front of Marie." "But Derek!" Fran was staring at his face, thickly encrusted with wax and paint. "I don't understand." "I wasn't sure it would work. That's why I didn't tell you before." Derek stretched again. "George Washington's suit fits me beautifully, doesn't it?" he went on, as she still stared uncomprehendingly. "I did this mechanical man stunt at all the college powwows. It always brought down the house, and people this afternoon fell for it like nobody's business. They tried so hard to make me laugh that they put themselves into good humor. I'll bet they bring all their friends and come back tonight, and the best of all, nobody could possibly recognize me under all this wax and paint." "Derek, nothing on earth is going to keep you from succeeding." His eyes were luminous with unshed tears. Derek shook his head. "Not since I have to live up to you, dear. I sort of bucked at making a fool of myself in front of all these strangers. It was different from making a little sport for my college pals. And then I thought of you. Out there selling tickets, I remembered that you had given up your good job and thrown in your lot with my uncertain fortunes. That decided me." Fran's lips trembled. He had called her dear. "I got fired," she said slowly. "So this is really charity. Giving me a job, you see? I need a job." "And I need you," Derek murmured in an odd tone. As Fran sold tickets and made change that night, she thought about Derek and what he had said. She was in love with him. The knowledge came to her with the force of a blow. In love with Derek Van Erp, and she had never guessed. That was why she had at last realized that the thrill she felt over Bill's dangerous kisses wasn't really love. This new tide of feeling which swept over her was quite different. It was something so wonderful that it took her breath away. "Hello, Fran." Fran's thoughts stopped short. "Bill," she gasped. With Bill was a big burly policeman. Fran's heart came in her throat and stayed there. "Pete," she said in an urgent undertone, "take the ticket booth for a minute, will you?" Pete climbed to the booth. As she slipped down, she drew Bill a little distance from the museum. "Now," she gasped, "what do you want?" "We want your Mr. Van Erp." Bill was smiling nastily. Fran caught her breath. "Don't say his name so loud. He calls himself Mr. Smith out here." Blandly, the officer said, "Whatever he calls himself, 'tis no concern of ours, but I have a warrant for the arrest of the person who stole a wax figure out of Mr. Sam Krause's storeroom." "Oh." Everything reeled dizzily about Fran. She clutched at the officer's arm. "But you can't do that. The Mandarin was an old figure that just took up space. Mr. Krause offered it to anybody who would carry it away. There was no question of stealing." "Mr. Krause seems to think differently," put in Bill importantly. Fran turned on Bill like a whirlwind. "So, this is the way you get even, is it? A low-down, contemptible way. You know darned well that Mr. Krause wanted to get rid of that figure." Bill smiled nastily. Fran went on in a breathless tone. "All right. Have it your way if you want to, but I was the one who took that wax figure from Mr. Krause's storeroom. Serve your old John Doe warrant on me. Let's have this over with." Bill stopped smiling and looked annoyed. "Mr. Van Erp is the thief," he snapped. "I was the one who took the figure," repeated Fran doggedly. Bill said a few words to the policeman in an undertone. The officer moved over to the corner and stood there. Bill pulled Fran into a secluded corner. His mouth met Fran's in a kiss that was degrading and frightening. Finally, he stopped kissing her. "You've got into my blood," he cried hoarsely. "I didn't know how crazy I was about you till I found out you'd fallen for this high-hat chap. But you'll never get him, see? Not if I have to kill both of you to keep you apart." Fran struggled to free herself from his hateful embrace. His arms were like bands of steel about her. "I can have him put in jail for the theft of the mandarin. It won't do any good for you to say you took the figure. I'll swear I saw him taking it from my uncle's shop." Fran gave a pitiful little groan. "Besides, I know this fellow's real name. No Smith business will go, so I'll smear the Van Erp name he's so proud of over the front page of every dirty news rag in town. I'll see that he pays for taking my girl." Fran clasped her hands. "Oh, no," she gasped. She remembered how she had given her word to Derek that no one should ever know his real identity. "No, you mustn't do that," she repeated. "There might be a way this could be fixed." Bill's voice was insinuating. "What?" Instantly Fran was tense. She had a foreboding of something evil. "If you married me, I pledge you my word that I'd forget all this. Van Erp can hide here in a moth-eaten museum till he dies for all I care." Fran swayed. Her knees seemed to buckle under her. She remembered how Derek had called her dear. She thought of the expression in Derek's eyes when he had told her she was his friend. She couldn't let Derek down, not ever. No price was too high to pay. "All right, if you'll promise faithfully that Derek goes free." Fran felt sick and worn out. Bill's lips lingered on hers hatefully. Then he let her go. Fran stood quite still, running the back of her hand across her lips as if to wipe off his kiss. Meanwhile, Bill had gone to summon the police officer. "Sorry," he said importantly to the policeman. "The whole affair was a mistake, just an error. Too bad I dragged you clear out here for nothing." Fran was shivering. Her head ached horribly. The price of Derek's pride was marrying Bill. She laughed hysterically. Yesterday, she might have thought that being married to Bill was the grandest thing in the world. Today, she knew better. She saw Bill with true eyes, and what she saw made her shudder. "Let's hurry," she gasped, beginning to walk toward the subway. She must get away before Derek missed her. "Don't you want to get your hat?" Bill's voice seemed to come from a very long way off. "What do I care about a hat?" Fran was tramping resolutely along. The ride into town was seemingly endless. Bill's hands were hot and possessive on her arm. Bill talked a great deal. Fran crouched against the seat. She felt numb and queer. "I'll be by tomorrow morning at 9, Bill said when he left her at the door of her boarding house. "But let me tell you, if you try to communicate with this Van Erp fellow, everything'll be off, and he'll go to jail. Don't forget that, and remember, I'm being pretty forgiving. Not every man would condescend to marry you after what's happened." When Fran was alone in her room, she brushed her lips with her spread fingers, whimpering like a child who has been hurt. Married to Bill. Oh, she couldn't. She threw herself face downward on the bed and wept. Finally exhausted, she fell asleep. It was 8 o'clock when she woke, stiff and unrefreshed from sleeping in her clothes. Numbly she undressed and bathed. She couldn't think, couldn't plan. Her mind seemed to have stopped. Slowly she put on her prettiest dress and her best slippers. With shaking hands she rouged her pallid cheeks. Someone knocked at the door. Fran's hand flew to her heart. Had Bill come already? Surely it wasn't time. "Coming," she said in an odd, little scared voice. She pulled her hat over her curls. Her feet stumbled as she went to the door. Bill kissed her till she went limp in his arms. Everything in the room whirled about crazily while Fran fought to keep from screaming. "White," he said in a satisfied tone. "I'm sure glad you're wearing white. A regular bride." Fran whispered, "I don't love you. You know that. Yet you insist on this farce of a wedding." Bill's eyes darkened angrily. "Stop that sort of talk," he commanded. "You're going to be my wife, and my wife is going to do as she's told." The Marriage License Bureau was filled with people. Tremblingly, Fran followed Bill into the room. She felt as if she were Marie Antoinette on the way to the guillotine. Fran looked at the people dazedly. Tall women seemed to marry little men, and big men selected little girls. Old and young, homely and pretty. Fran bit her lips and sank down into the nearest chair. "You'll have to wait," cackled the old man who was with a young, giggling girl. "Looks like people is still getting married despite what the books and newspapers say." Fran felt as if there wasn't enough air in the room to breathe. She twisted her fingers together. She fought with all her will to keep from fainting. Derek, she must remember that she was doing this for Derek. "Like to take a look at the morning paper?" cackled the talkative old bridegroom-elect. Limply, Fran accepted the crumpled sheet. She held the newspaper for a time, not even looking at it. She was horribly aware of Bill's shoulder against hers. Suddenly, she felt Bill stiffen. He made a lunge for the newspaper, but he was too late. Fran's eyes had caught a glimpse of the front page. "Oh!" she gasped. She snatched the paper away from Bill's clutching hand. On the front page was a picture. Derek in his King Louis costume. "Scion of wealthy house jailed" was the heading. Under the picture of an interior shot of the museum was the text, "Derek Van Erp steals wax figure." Beside that was an old snapshot of Derek in his polo costume. Fran's eyes blurred with fury. "So, you sold out Derek anyway, after you'd promised." "You're the next couple," cackled the old fellow, coming back with his license in his hand. "Fran, I can explain." Bill was licking his dry lips. "So can I." Fran's hand shot out, and she slapped Bill resoundingly across his face. A startled gasp went over the room. Fran didn't notice. She was fumbling her way out of the place. She was crying horribly. She blundered blindly into someone who was running pell-mell down the corridor. "Fran! Fran, darling!" Loving arms closed about her. "Fran, I'm not too late. You haven't married that rotter." Fran blinked back her tears. "Derek!" She whispered his name. She clung to him. "Oh, Derek, I didn't tell about you. I would have died rather than have anybody find out. I was going to marry Bill to keep him from telling. So that was it." Derek's voice was grim. "Darling, I've been tracing." "No littering in the halls, if you please," said a harsh official voice. Hastily, Derek released Fran. "Come on, dear," he said. "I've a cab waiting outside." Can we afford a taxi?" Fran asked doubtfully as she got in. "Oh, my sweet." He drew her close. He laid his face against hers. "I've been tracing you ever since I got out of jail early this morning. My Uncle Lawrence's lawyer got me out the first thing. I paid $40 for the doggone Mandarin. That got me free." "Oh," sobbed Fran. "Oh, your money! And it was my fault for giving the figure to you. I thought I was helping and—" "Where do you want to go, if anywhere?" asked the taxi driver in a disagreeable tone. "Drive around Central Park, anywhere." Derek was kissing Fran tumultuously. "You were helping me, darling," he assured her fatuously. "Uncle Lawrence thought I was all Van Erp. He's my mother's brother, you see, and he just liked the girl I was going to marry, and he thought I was the sort of man who would sink under adverse conditions. And when he saw that article in the newspaper, he was delighted. He came and looked me up right away. Dear, he's giving me a job in his office. A real job with lots of money. There's only one condition. I have to keep the Waxworks Museum, and Saturdays he wants me to be King Louis again. He's afraid I'll get high hat or something, I guess." Derek's voice was lilting with happiness. "Oh," said Fran. She drew away slightly. "So you're going back to being the sort of man that's a million miles above me," she said. "I'm glad for you, Derek. Awfully glad. Only—" her voice broke. "Only you're going to hate being married to a mere businessman?" Derek's lips lingered on hers. "Is that what you're trying to tell me?" "Married?" quavered Fran. "I couldn't tell you how much I loved you. I couldn't ask you to be my wife, not when I didn't have a penny to my name. But now I'm a plutocrat. Oh, Fran, darling, you've got to marry me. I love you so. I want you so. I need you so," he finished in a low voice. Fran's lips quivered against his. "Of course I'll marry you," she sobbed. "I've adored you since the very first minute you came into the store." Derek chuckled. "I'll bet that newspaper article will bring a lot of trade to the museum. Too bad we won't be there to see. I left Pete in charge." He tilted Fran's chin with his forefinger. "Out of your pretty little nose, sweet. Uncle Lawrence is waiting for us to have luncheon with him at the Ritz. Then we can go and get married. How would that program suit you?" "Anything," Fran exclaimed, "so long as we're together." Derek Van Erp found that such a satisfactory answer that he almost forgot to give her the box he had in his coat pocket. "6 pairs of cobweb stockings, darling," he said gleefully, "bought with an advance on my salary. These stockings are your own, sweet. They don't belong to Marie Antoinette." "I adore you," repeated Fran. Their lips met in a long, long kiss. Thank you for listening. Life can't always be a romance story, but you can choose to get lost in one whenever you wish. I hope you enjoyed my sharing of this special piece of fiction from the recent past. You may want to support my efforts, and if so, I invite you to comment, share, and like this presentation on YouTube. You may want to be a part of my classic romance list. You can be notified of my latest presentations. Simply subscribe to my YouTube channel. The subscribe button is on the lower right-hand corner of the header on my channel page, Classic Romance Stories. After you click that, go to the lower left sidebar, click Manage Subscriptions. There's a drop-down box. Check the box Send Me Updates, so that if you wish, you can be notified in your email, the one you have linked to your YouTube Gmail account, when new videos are posted. I invite you to get lost with me in another classic romance story very soon. Stay tuned for the next presentation. Goodbye for now.
This has been a Far Out Radio production.